The views presented in this program are not meant to express the specific views of the Lafayette Bible Fellowship. You are listening to the Vigilance Radio Network.
My first question is, can they see the warm fire in the background? Nice. Welcome back to Culture Insanity. Welcome back to the podcast. We got a nice warm fire in the background, so I hope you feel cozy during this episode. This is episode number 3 of season 3, so we welcome you back. As I said about 30 minutes ago on the Facebook page, for our female audience that will be tuning in or listening either now or in the future, we welcome your input on this particular episode because the topics of the day are predominantly female heavy. And so we don't want to sound like a bunch of men on a couch, talking about female exclusive things, but obviously we don't exactly agree with that stance to begin with. But we do welcome your input. So if you have thoughts on today's show, whether you're tuning in live or you'll be tuning in, down the road, put them out there. Put them on the comments section of the video and get into a dialogue with us about it because we're interested in what you think from a female perspective regarding today's topic. So with that said,
I'll just channel my female side.
Yeah. You're already going to turn them against you by saying something like that. So what we have on the docket for today is we're going to talk a little bit about the halftime show from the Super Bowl less than a week ago. And then there was a thing in the news maybe about a week ago now, with Julianne Hough, I think is how you say her name, Hough, the former Dancing with the Stars.
It's Juliana.
Julianne.
I think it's Julianne.
Well, it's definitely Huff.
Yeah, Julianne Hough.
Yes, she was
like enough.
Her brother's Derek.
The GH.
Whoa!
Somebody watches Dancing with the Stars.
Somebody watches Dancing with the Stars.
For many years, I was familiar with it.
Really? You watch it?
I'm a very cultural guy.
Oh, wow. So we're going to be talking about her. She was in the news controversially in the last week for this practice that she's engaging in. We're going to talk a little bit about The Handmaid's Tale and Darwin's influence on that. And if we have time, we'll talk about this ministry that is in Kansas City that I think is interesting just to ask a couple questions about. But that's what's on the dock today. So without further ado, we'll start off with the halftime show. So Josh said you didn't watch it, so you have no idea really what the conversation's about.
I don't know anything about sliding into first base or making nothing but net.
Josh is just talking about his sports ignorance in general.
I'm joking. Clearly, I know that's baseball and basketball. Come on, guys.
Yes, I know you're making a joke.
Goal!
And, of course, the halftime show is about football.
It's not about football. It takes place during the football game. But you're aware. You didn't see it, but you're aware of the conversation.
I heard stuff. And
so you have a meta knowledge of it, you'd
say?
Yeah. Just keeping your finger on the pulse as you do.
Oh, yeah.
All right, so I'll give you the Adam Swark Notes version of it. So it started out, it was Shakira and Jennifer Lopez, and it started out with Shakira coming out and just basically being Shakira. She's pretty well known for like her dancing and stuff and her hips. So she does a lot of like
they don't lie.
She does a lot of dancing like that, and she had a whole thing. And I'd call her portion of the show normal for what she's known for.
And then she also is doing the Wookiee singing. Right?
Josh says that Shakira sings like a Wookiee because she sings from the throat.
Well, she sings
from the head.
It's between the head and the throat, so it's like, yeah.
So there's that. She did do this strange thing which people flagged, like she got really close to the camera and she did this like, I don't even want to do it because I don't want to embarrass myself, but whatever. For you guys, I'll do it. She was like, she did something like that. And so people were like, what the hell was that about? So there's this whole thing about what it was. So more on that, I guess, later. And then, so she did her whole thing for maybe 5-10 minutes or something. I don't know. And then Jennifer Lopez came out and she came out starting out like on a stripper pole, which was the beginning of where this whole controversy is. The rest of the show was the critics would say it was like hypersexualized, and it was especially weird because like J-Lo had her daughter on the stage at one point. Like she did a back and forth with her, and it was supposed to be this like I guess beautiful thing or something.
Her daughter can sing?
I mean, I'm not a singer. You're asking the wrong guy.
Okay. Did it seem like her daughter could sing?
It seemed like her daughter did fine.
That's cool.
Yeah, it didn't seem like, oh, that was a train wreck. Why did she do that? Yeah, it seemed she was fine. But anyways, the whole performance was just sort of hypersexual. I can say from my experience, like when I was over at my family's watching it, there were several people that were put off by it, and I wouldn't call my family prude or even like holy Christian, not by any means. Like, but they were like uncomfortable because like we had our kids there, and some of the kids, not all of them, were sort of like in and out of watching it and stuff, and it was just this weird thing. But so that was my experience with it, is like people that I wouldn't consider, Christian in nature were like, this is awkward, and like I feel awkward watching this show right now.
Sure.
So that's the long and short of it. It was this like hypersexual thing, the whole stripper pole thing, so on and so forth. I want to read a couple different, tweets and stuff from critics about it, so you guys can get a better understanding of just the pulse of the situation. I know you said you've been keeping up on it, but it said it sparked debate. Was it empowering to watch two women of color over 40 performing in a provocative way, or had we reverted back to a pre-Me Too movement of objectifying women? Quote, the Super Bowl halftime show was just a bad strip show. We have had so much positive discussion about not treating women like sexual objects. Then they go and do this. You can't cry that women need to be treated better, then support the display of sexual objectifying. This is a different person now. I'm no prude, but watching it with my 7-year-old daughter and 11-year-old son was really uncomfortable. Another person. I'm embarrassed for my kids to watch this halftime show. What the hell? Stripper poles, crotch and rear shots. That was another thing. There was like several moments where like J-Lo was like spread open for the camera, and it was like, whoa, it was really like jarring, I'd call it.
Sure.
And this person says no dignity, and then a bunch of hashtags. And then there's of course the opposite side of people where they're supporting it and saying all these different things that strong women and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
One person says, for 15 minutes, Shakira and J-Lo united the masses better than anyone could. This is someone from Vox. Super Bowl halftime performances can be and often are quite bad, but this year's rose to the top with a mix of fun performance and pointed political statements. A stage full of bright, gifted women, men, and children of color was more emboldening sight than anything PR teams trying to buy their attention could muster. It was a weird night, but it was a good halftime show. So there's that. I want to quickly read this one person's review on it. It says, well, until Sunday, that is, when the Super Bowl became yet another chapter in the ongoing sexualization of American culture, of women, and of kids. In the midst of our culture's ubiquitous calls to protect kids and women from abuse and harassment, especially in this Me Too era, we pretend that as long as we call it art or female empowerment, that this sort of overt sexualization will magically have none of the consequences we now complain about. That was an understatement even then. A far more accurate description is that this is an out-of-control social experiment, and the guinea pigs are primarily our own children. In addition to the predatory, hardcore pornography that haunts their devices and online lives, experimental theories about gender and sexuality haunt their education, and as we saw Sunday, stripper poles and outfits haunt their so-called art and entertainment. One psychologist, I think, says, ethics require that subjects of social experimentation give informed consent. But in our culture, adults force young people who have no say in the matter to go along with their fantasies, theories, and so-called expressions of empowerment and freedom. So, initial thoughts. Without having seen it, but with hearing it and hearing me explain it. What are your thoughts?
Well, first of all, have you guys seen Hustlers?
Sure have.
Have you seen Hustlers?
A whole lot of J-Lo.
No.
I gotta say, there is some deep beauty in the way that J-Lo in particular is able to move at, 50?
She's old. She's getting up there.
Which is crazy. And there's a whole scene where she's teaching of all things, the mother from Fresh Off the Boat.
Oh, yeah.
It's really weird. But she's teaching the mother from Fresh Off the...
Just imagining that movie being pitched to the producers.
But there's a whole scene where she's teaching her how to strip, and she's showing her different moves on the stripper pole. She's not, like, stripping or anything, but she's showing her how to, like, glide around
the
stripper
athletics
pole.
of it, yeah.
And it was really impressive. And so I got to think that there's a level at which J-Lo is, like, super proud of that and, views it as a career-defining thing, especially since a lot of people thought that she was snubbed by the Oscars. And I think, the Oscars are about to come on.
Tomorrow.
Yeah. And so I imagine that this is sort of her, like, getting back at them. So there's that. That being said, it is definitely not the right place for it, and that's really interesting.
Meaning, for the listener, a family watched a world watched thing where definitely kids are going to be watching and stuff. That's what you're referring to,
right. It's not a family oriented thing. The other thing about it that I think is interesting is the outcries now when we're talking about children, when we have things like library stories with drag queens.
Oh yeah, that's a big thing here.
Right, in Portland. That's a huge thing, is you have, kids who have these things that are not ready for prime time. And for the record, I'm not arguing about the morality of those things. That's a whole nother conversation. Stripping and drag queening, if that's a...
Sure.
I don't know if you can add a gerund to the end of it and make it into a thing. But anyway...
Can't you do that with anything?
Yeah, but I'm not arguing about the morality of it. That being said, it is interesting to cry foul here, but not cry foul there. I think that the authors are right in that it does kind of show where we are as a society, and I think that it shouldn't surprise them that that's where we're going in our halftime shows.
Yeah, I think the woman who wrote the article that I was quoting from at the end there, she was referencing an article she wrote back in 2013 where she was saying, I forget who was performing. It might have been Beyonce. I could be wrong about that. But she was commenting on her article back then about how she was predicting what's it going to be in a few years, a stripper pole out there, and lo and behold, like that's literally what was out there.
Yeah,
so
that's really funny.
She got hit the nail right on the head.
So I didn't see it. Was J-Lo actually stripping or just moving around the pole?
She was just sort of spinning around it, but it was very sexual. Like the whole performance by nature was just very, J-Lo and Shakira. I mean,
well, the other question I have is like, what do people expect? Have you watched any of their music videos?
That's what I was saying.
That's another. These kids are watching these video like I can understand a movie has a higher threshold for entry. So maybe not everybody's going to have seen Hustlers.
So is that your main beef with it then? Like that it's broadcast on this widely watched thing where it's going to be in front of kids. Like it doesn't have the MPAA rating, for example. It's the Super Bowl. Like
no, I don't necessarily have. Okay, so let me be clear. So Lucy Brown makes this comment. She says, pole dancing is over the top. The whole show depends on your definition of art. I have no problem with a beautiful body properly admired between a husband and a wife. For the record, I agree with that concept. I also don't have a problem with a beautiful body properly admired in like a proper art form. Like a proper nude painting, for instance.
You haven't seen Titanic. I'm sure you know the.
Yeah, I know the whole thing with Kate Winslet. Yeah, I know. No, I don't. So I do think that there's more context in which nudity, and this isn't even what we're talking about,
right.
But in which admiring of the sculpture of man, which includes woman, is proper. I do think that there's more proper context than just between a husband and a wife. Sexuality should just be between a husband and a wife. This clearly blurs the lines of sexuality and
admiring
and bodily form.
Yeah.
But what I mostly have a problem with is the outrage that people have when that's exactly what they've invited into their living room. Like, why do you invite that into your living room and then are outraged that you have it there? Why do you pretend that your children don't already see these things?
Yeah, it's just you're playing dumb or something.
The reason why Shakira and J-Lo were invited is because they have enough popularity, which means that, you know, which means people already know what they do and how they dance and how they act. So
your issues with the parents.
Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course. I think that it's incredibly hypocritical. So do I want that for my family and my daughter, for instance, to watch those things? No, and I'm glad that she doesn't. But there's a reason why she doesn't, because I'm not dumb. That's why.
Yeah. Well, okay. So I mean, this issues. You could just go down so many rabbit holes on this thing. First of all, let me say right off the bat, I love stripper poles. I think that, you know, if I were going to do more remodeling on the house, I'd put a stripper pole in.
You know, I'd be shocked if
it's just
you weren't concocting up something as Josh was speaking.
It's just so wonderful to wrap yourself around it and do some gyrations and
you'd probably break your body down if you tried to do that.
Well, have you seen that commercial? Have you seen the commercial with the guy doing the Pepsi thing and he's in the bus and he's working the bus pole like a anyway?
No, but there is a wonderful episode of King of Queens
where he's doing
Doug wants his wife
to do a stripper
pole,
and
he convinces her to do it, and then she's just so bad at it that he just has to show her how it's done,
and he kills it.
And he is so graceful.
Yeah,
it's ridiculous.
For such a big guy,
he's so graceful. I'll try and find that clip.
That's funny. So you know, I think that if you know, I think in the right cultural setting, like you said, admiring the human form. You know, I think that if the stripper poles were popular in the Renaissance, that Michelangelo would have not only done a David
on a pole,
but would have done, you know, had a stripper pole in there.
Wow.
That being said, it's fascinating to me. It's fascinating to me that you have people outraged, and I love some of the intellectual comments that you read of people that have really thought this through, and they're really they're upset. They're really upset by what it is that they're seeing here. And Josh is absolutely correct. You know, the TV has an off switch. Turn the TV off if it bothers you. But here we have people that are watching a game.
It's like bugs to a light.
Which, you know, people that are watching a game which promotes, so you have society saying they hate violence, but you have a game being watched which promotes violence.
I don't know about that.
Well, football's a very violent game. If you've ever played it, you find out the hard way. Football's a very violent game, and the halftime show is meant to entertain people that are drawn to watching this game. And now they're talking about the problems with the halftime show.
Now that is an interesting point. I don't agree that football necessarily promotes violence, and I'm not Freudian in my thinking. However, Freud postulates that the id of a person is mostly sex and aggression, right? And that's really interesting. And football's a very aggressive game.
Oh,
right?
It is, and you could take it way further in the stripper pole thing by talking about the pole representing the phallus and all the stuff.
Well, of course, that's literally what it represents.
Yeah.
So but that concept of
sorry to embarrass you, Adam. It's just
what?
Phallus means penis, in case viewers don't know.
Yeah, this, you know, for those of you who have an education.
Yeah, but, and fetus means baby, whole nother story. So, but no, there is something to be said for sex and aggression go hand in hand.
Yeah, I mean.
Again, I don't buy into everything that Freud said, but.
I mean, I'm impressed to the extent that, like you said, J-Lo's around. She's still making it happen.
You know what? She is a very underrated actress.
Yeah.
She's pretty good. What do you guys think about, and you were alluding to it obviously in some of your responses, but do you guys think that it cheapens the current, you know, push for the whole Me Too thing?
Well, the whole Me Too
Like,
thing,
is it-
first of all, is
Is it wanting your cake and eating it too? Like,
yes.
obviously, we don't support men being aggressive on women in that way. That should go
Well,
without
I mean,
saying.
there's a certain narrative that's being written in regard to that. I don't know if Me Too is a good example of it, but there is a narrative that's being written, and if you look at things as being equal, then yes, it's confusing. But if you look at the narrative as essentially men should be subjugated and be below women and so on and so forth, then the idea that a woman comes out and does whatever she wants to and it's great, but if a man participates in it, it's not, that is completely within the narrative.
I think it muddies the whole. We're trying to have some type of a legitimate discussion about sexuality and the genders and how people interact, and we've got this whole thing going on with, we've got a trial going on right now with Weinberg. We've got Weinstein.
Okay.
We've got a trial going on
Max
with Weinstein.
Weinberg?
Max
With-
Weinberg.
yeah.
And the Max Weinberg 7?
Yeah.
We've got
From the E Street Band.
Yeah. We've got people confused about the Me Too movement. We've got people that so I think that it muddies the water about this whole sexuality thing that's going on in our culture right now, and makes it more difficult to be able to have a solid understanding.
For
people who are confused out there, this would only confuse you more.
If you are really trying to seek out justice and equality, as you say, then it's confusing. But if you actually are not doing that, and what you're looking for is the subjugation of men in response to their intersectional, their lack of intersectionality, and you think of them as, cisgendered, God forbid they be white, God forbid they be Christian males, and you look at them as basically an affront to your intersectionality, then whatever you do is right, because they're the oppressors.
Right. I'm leaning more towards a kind of a Amazonian type society that believes that men are to be used as a means to an end.
John Parker is asking if anyone you know who choreographed their routine.
What?
Well,
I'm guessing
J-Lo
it's-
may have.
I'm guessing it's Yen Ping.
I don't know. Nice. J-Lo is a choreographer, and she may have done her own.
That's true. I wouldn't be surprised if she did. I'm guessing you're asking that question from the standpoint of who made them do it, who had the power or authority, John.
I have to imagine it was...
Well, she's. I just.
Yeah.
goes-
she was heavily involved.
She's a big enough star that she does choreography for major productions. So it wouldn't surprise me if she did her own choreography.
Lucy
Yeah.
Brown says, when a body through nakedness, gyration, or provocative dress brings out erotic desires, that is to me dangerous. But looking at an art expression without being sensual is fine. A great looking naked woman or man is a wonderful creation to be admired. Yeah, I agree with you. Here's the issue with that is the concept of what is sexual is arbitrary. It used to.
It is more
There's
so
like a-
today.
there-
It's
used to be-
cultural.
There
Yeah.
used to be a classical definition of what is beautiful. Is that what you're talking about?
Well, yeah. I mean, for instance, we look at sculptures of the ancient goddess, was it Diana, that people used to steal and have sex with.
Right.
You guys, I don't know if you know about that, but they used to, people would take these sculptures and, try to have sex with them. But we look at them today, and that idea of Greco-Roman beauty is not what we view as beautiful today.
Right.
We view that as fat and ugly.
I love the fact
It's in this culture.
I love the fact Lucy Brown is such a deep thinker.
Okay.
Wow.
Good job, Lucy Brown.
John Parker asks, if a woman does it make it okay to... If a woman choreographed, does it make it okay to do that movement? So that's what I thought you were going for, John. Again, I'm just going to lean on the side that, if you're holding the position... Wow. Brittany Kunkel says, it's the so you think you can dance people.
They choreographed it.
Wow.
Yeah.
Twitch.
If you're holding that position that like a Jezebelic position that men should be subjugated because they are the oppressors, and you're holding this sort of intersectionality idea, then it doesn't matter. And though the majority of society doesn't actually hold that position, I think that it's really clear that those in Hollywood, those in the film industry, the movie industry, the music industry, are definitely influenced by that position.
Oh, yeah.
Lastly, before we move on, you almost had the perfect segue, so I appreciate it. But what is our thoughts about this comment that I said at the very end from this? I think, like I said, I think he's a psychologist. He's a professor or something. Ethics require that subjects of social experimentation give informed consent, but in our culture, we see the opposite, basically. Adults force young people who have no say in the matter to go along with the fantasies, theories, and so-called. I'm not a student of ethics, but, like, is that true? And, like, is there a hypocrisy in that, or what's going on with that?
Yeah, I would say it's true, but I don't think that this is a social experiment. I think that it's a social implementation.
Yeah, I think more and more what you find is that...
We're past social experiment.
Right.
Well, no, I think that more and more what we find in a nuance of the culture that we live in right now is that you have people that push their particular narrative on a number of fronts, and there's no justification for it, but they push the narrative, hoping that that narrative will become ingrained into society.
A social experiment is something like MTV, right?
Yeah.
It was behind a paywall, and people had to pay to access it, and that experiment succeeded. Putting it on national television is the implementation of it.
Right.
They're behind. Yes, I agree, but it's not unethical because, especially if your ethics are based on societal norms, and they're arbitrary. So there's that. If you want to get into ethics,
Yeah, I'd say SNL is also a social experiment.
because it's so late.
Yeah. Well, definitely when it first came out,
Yeah.
definitely late night and always pushing the envelope.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that was their thing. Not ready for prime time.
Right.
So.
All right, let's move on. You had made a comment, excuse me, about maybe it's going it's, influenced by Amazonian ideals or whatever, and, men are at the whim of women.
Right. Not Amazon as in
Right.
Jeff Bezos.
Jeff Bezos.
Right.
Although the world's being influenced by those ideals too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say. Anyways, no, I was going to ask, I just read the other day that he's worth like $176 billion.
Yep.
And I don't even know how to fathom that amount of money. And at what point do you have so much money? Like, is there a magic number where it's just like, I don't know. I can't even fathom that amount of money.
No, I agree with you.
Anyways, that's neither here nor there. So, The Handmaid's Tale. I mentioned at the top of the hour. So, The Handmaid's Tale is basically what Pastor Monty was just saying, although in reverse. It's this dystopian future, right? And I don't watch it. I know about it. Josh watches a little, knows definitely more than me. I'm sure you have a meta. Oh, no, you don't. You really have any.
I don't watch it all.
But The Handmaid's Tale is a show about basically women who are subjected to whatever men want them for. They're sexual slaves, essentially, is the long and short of that.
So is Mormonism on primetime?
And it follows...
So that's not exactly accurate. The issue is it's not... Yeah. There are women who are not sexual slaves, and there's a whole slew of women who are not sexual slaves. It's women who can have children because there's some sort of virus that wipes out the ability for people to have children.
Oh, really?
And then the people who can have children are turned into baby makers.
Yeah.
And then because they're
Handmaids.
essentially enslaved to society to make babies,
Right.
And they're given to families to produce. So like the main character, her name is Offred. Offred.
Oh.
Right? Well, her real name's June.
Okay.
But her name's Offred. They keep calling her that. And then throughout the series you find out that it's of Fred because the family that she was given to, the male in the family, his name is Fred.
Interesting.
Frederick. And so basically she is married to him to produce the children for the other women who can't have children. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so she becomes a sexual slave in that regard, and then they're not supposed to, but the men use those women, sexually, and not just to have children. It's a whole thing. It's interesting.
So I should share this link with you so you can share it with. Actually, it's on the thread. If you want to pull it up, the Handmaid's Tale. It's on our Culture Insanity thread.
Okay.
Just to post to the comment section, but. There's a whole thing about Darwin's influence on this show and his lesser known work of sexual selection rather than natural selection.
You mean
and,
eugenics?
Yeah. So I'm gonna try and piece together a few excerpts from that article, which Josh is about to post, and hopefully it stitches together to make sense.
Speaking of which, if you're looking at the posts, feel free to scroll up and you will see the post of Doug Heffernan doing a pole dance.
You dug that up. Huh?
I found it.
Wow.
So it says I think it's talking about the show here, the chief's distinction in the intellectual powers of the two sexes is shown by man attaining a higher, no, this is what Darwin believes. This is a quote from his book from The Descent of Man. And the sexual selection. But he says the chief distinction in the intellectual powers of the two sexes is shown by man attaining to a higher eminence in whatever he takes up than woman can attain, whether requiring deep thought, reason, or imagination, or merely the use of the senses and hands. And then the writer, he's a historian writing a book about Darwin and his, theories. He says this distinction could be explained, according to Darwin, by the fact that men had to struggle against one another in the contest for mates, whereas women were largely passive in this process. And through this struggle, men acquired certain intellectual capabilities late in their development, capabilities that were then only passed on to male offspring. Because of this, the mental state of women was arrested in time and characteristic, as Darwin put it, of the lower races, and therefore of a past and lower state of civilization, which is a huge influence on the show. Like, that's what it's borrowing from.
Sure.
On the surface, therefore, Gilead, which is the place in the show, Handmaid's Tale, Gilead may look like an unrealistic society that chose to embrace its most extreme views about gender in order to survive. But the brilliance of The Handmaid's Tale is in showing that many of those views in certain contexts are actually not so radical and can even be found in classic biology texts, and still are in many, the writers suggest. But this all suggests that the reference to Darwin's Descent of Man in The Handmaid's Tale is not only relevant, but even necessary. So I don't know what that is. I don't know if that's him.
Sounds like he's pro-Gilead.
Supporting, Darwin's theories and what's
Okay,
going on in
then.
the show, which is like, whoa. But anyways,
Well, you'd have to, because Gilead's also associated with Christianity.
oh, is it?
Yeah, so there's a whole thing with Gilead in there's prayer and the way they talk is religious in nature. I can't remember the terms they use, but they use these coming and going blessings. His eye be upon you, or something like that. Anyway.
So this writer here, who apparently is pro-Darwin, but he's saying that you can even still find Darwin's influence on classical biology text and stuff.
Yeah.
Students, they're studying biology as far as sexual selection goes. But obviously the show is against that, right? And that's why we're following this character, Offred
June.
June.
Yeah.
So there's that. And so obviously we're in a time where there's a pushback to this kind of thinking, perhaps not in biology, as he's suggesting, but certainly culturally. But my question is, without God at our base, what will this pushback on Darwin's sexual selection and his influence, what will it amount to? Will it be successful, or where are they rooted in their pushback of this? What will trump Darwin's influence?
Well, it's interesting how confused that concept is. Even as you're reading it, you're how is this going against that? Yeah, it's pretty clear that this person would have to be pro-Gilead based on what they're saying. Mm-hmm. And as you are looking at the material or reading the book, it's confused because it wants to hold a dissenting voice to this treatment of women, right? Which is a distinctly Christian worldview, for the record. But then in the same vein, it also wants to hold that there is a logic.
Sorry to interrupt, are you talking about the Darwin book, or are you talking about The Handmaid's Tale?
The Handmaid's Tale.
Okay.
Okay, so in The Handmaid's Tale, it's portrayed as archaic and brutal and superstitious, basically, to hold these views about women and men, that the idea that men are dominant over women. But in the same vein, it is also, it's like there's also the confusion of like throwing in the atheistic perspective. The truth is that this author is going back too far. Like that's the key to it. He's trying to give a distinction as to how it is that women came to be subjectified by men in the evolutionary process. My question is, why does that matter? Survival of the fittest is now. Right? So if women, according to a Darwinistic theology, because that's really what it is, not philosophy. If according to a Darwinistic theology, man's place in the universe, if you are the weaker of the two, then you are to be dominated and then subjugated. That's just how it is. It doesn't matter who was dominant first or not. And so women, because they are weaker physiologically than men, they are dominated by men. That's how it should be if you're atheistic in nature. If you don't have the idea that all people are created in the image of God, that is transcendent, that has nothing to do with your physiology, and therefore you should be treated with respect. That's the insidious nature of The Handmaid's Tale, is that it's holding two positions at the same time.
Yeah, I could be wrong. I could be wrong. I'm not a, Darwin historian, but I think that in the article, the author, who is, was saying that this writing of his came before his, more widely known, theories of evolution and stuff. So maybe it was a natural conclusion. Because I was going to say, if it was the other way around, as you're saying, that it's redundant, this whole sexual selection thing, right?
Yeah.
The survival of the fittest doesn't care about sex. It just cares about who's the stronger.
Right.
But I can't remember say that this Descent of Man book that talks about sexual selection.
Well,
if it came
first, then it's just like every other cultic belief that subjugates women, right?
Yeah.
That all it is it's justification of your sexual desires. So.
Yeah, and we see elements of that even in reality. I don't know if this Handmaid's Tale is a fiction, an extension of what is presented in the book, but it's still a fiction. But in reality, we have pockets of individuals, even inside of the United States, who practice this in reality. Now, they don't do it legally, and there are problems, but you can go into certain sections of Utah and still find Mormon clusters where this exact thing is practiced. And it's and they tout, as it were, the beauty of the circumstance where they're living in this fashion. So you have individuals who have multiple wives. You have individuals that are capable of giving birth, and you have a community that forms around the structure, the roles that end up being placed in that society because of your ability to perform or not perform. And so there's a whole intricacy of what happens in this type of a society. It goes back to a perversion of understanding the position of man. And if you reject truth, you reject God's design, then you have to come up with something in order to justify your own actions. And the reality of it is that sexually, men are aggressive and will dominate those that are less aggressive.
Yeah, they're physiologically. I mean, women can be aggressive too, but it's going to be in a different way, and they're not geared toward that the way that men are.
Yeah.
Well,
In general,
we talked a little bit about that on Truth Time in a different context with what's going on with with women realizing that with the whole transgender thing and the issue about transgender and people beginning to reject the idea that men who are transgenders can compete in women's sports and dominate those sports because they're physically different, and there's an argument going on in society today. But the reality of it is that I'm always fascinated, like when I watch martial arts programs, and you see, women martial artists and men martial artists, and these women who are aggressive and really good at martial arts, and they go up against a male counterpart, and just one ding and they're slammed to the ground because they're physically different, and even though they may have skill,
It's actually disturbing. It doesn't happen here in the United States. It happens in some of the Asian countries, and I've seen some videos that were.
I'd love to see Ronda Rousey get into a battle with
I
a guy.
have no doubt she could probably take on like a good amount of
Sure.
guys. But there's a hilarious, if not wildly inappropriate, South Park bit about the whole male competing.
Oh, right.
With Macho Man Randy Savage.
yeah.
But what South Park episode isn't wildly inappropriate?
So James Pierzina says that The Descent of Man was published in 1871, 12 years after On the Origin of the Species. And Lucy Brown makes a joke, I think. How does that reasoning apply to the superwoman race, the Amazons? Continue. Sorry.
No, I was just gonna say, yeah, you don't find that here in the United States. At
Not
least,
so much.
Not yet.
At least not on the main level, like maybe underground or something that's not legal, because that's not legal to be doing here within our athletic whatever leagues, whether it's like UFC, if that's what maybe you're.
Right, they
talking
keep
about
them
something.
distinct.
They keep them
for safety.
separated for safety, because it's true. Like a man could easily kill a woman with like a hit, like he can hit. Like their bodies aren't meant to take it as much. They're just physiologically different. Like whether you think it's right or wrong, it's not, whatever, it just is. Like
Yeah.
their bone structure is different than our bone structure and all these
Right.
different things.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
And for the record, that door swings both ways. There are things that
Sure.
men can't do that we
Like
are
give birth.
weaker in. Well, even our ability to process is different. Like our communication is harder for men.
We'll
for
see
instance.
what
I was just thinking about physiologically, like their bodies aren't set up to give birth.
Well,
Well,
I do mean physiologically. Our
Okay.
brains are wired differently.
Okay.
Well, when you were reading some of the comments there, I was thinking that the reason why it took men longer to come to the conclusion that they were superior and what have you is because they only think with one part of their brain
At a time.
at a time, and so it
The
took longer to get there.
and I want to be clear. Men are not superior to women. They are physiologically different than women, and that gives them certain advantages. And according to Scripture, they have a certain place in the structure of God's economy.
Mm-hmm.
But it's much like the Holy Spirit, God the Father, and God the Son, in that none of them is more God than the other.
Men are not superior.
Thanks. That's very helpful.
You're not helping.
My
So-
whole world is shattered.
So
Notice him laughing.
Notice him laughing. Nobody is saying that men are superior to women in terms of their value. There are things that men are superior to women in terms of their actuation, just as there are things that women are superior to men in their actuation.
Yeah.
So,
All right, let's move on. Let's move on to the Julianne Hough topic. So you can share.
we lost a lot of viewers on that one.
Oh, jeez. Thanks. Thanks. You over there. Yeah, you should post that Julianne Hough thing to the comments section.
Okay.
So she was in as I said at the top, she was in the headlines recently for her participation with this one chiropractor. I don't know if he is Swiss or if it was just in like a Switzerland conference. I don't know if it's both or one or the other. But so this guy who's becoming known for his somatic energy healing, as it's called, and it's really interesting, if not disturbing. But basically, he's like running his fingertips along her body in a specific way, I'm guessing, according to him, which evokes or helps to expel bad energy, as it were. And so, yeah, it's this whole thing, and the definition of this somatic energy healing says somatic therapy is a holistic therapy that studies the relationship between the mind and body in regard to psychological past. The theory behind somatic therapy is that trauma symptoms are the effects of instability of the autonomic nervous system. Past traumas disrupt that nervous system, and so this whole thing is to help stimulate or manipulate the nervous system in a way that expels these bad energies or these bad traumas or whatever. So the viral video that was online on YouTube and stuff was her on this table, and this guy's standing over her and she's face down and he's doing this thing and she's like really like contorting in weird ways, and it's just really sort of disturbing, and a lot of people were calling it an exorcism. That was the hashtag behind
more
it. More
likely a reverse exorcism.
Yeah, so that's our question. What are we as believers supposed to make of this and discern from this? Because even from a non-believing perspective, as you saw in that video earlier with the news anchor or whatever, it was disturbing. So what do we make of this? Obviously, chiropractic practices have their own history, which is not anything that we align our beliefs with, but what should we be making of this? Because it's becoming a thing with more and more Hollywood, high profile, highly influential people that perhaps people are going to be wanting to participate in or try out, and
it's not new.
No, it's not new, and I think
even in Hollywood, it's not new. The East has always informed the West in that regard.
I think that the difficulty for believers, if we take it from that standpoint, the difficulty for believers are many believers are ignorant of their own faith and ignorant of other faiths. So what we see being demonstrated here in the Julianne Hough issue comes out of the understanding of Hinduism and what Hinduism teaches in regard to several things. First of all, the Kundalini force, which permeates a body.
Kundalini. I'll post it.
If it is lined up correct. So according to Hindu teaching, you have chakras in your body, and those chakras being in alignment, if they're in alignment correctly, allow the natural force in your body to align correctly so that you can become one with Atman. Now, there's a couple of things, or ultimate reality for the simple definition. So
and this is the whole yoga thing, right?
That's,
for the listener.
that comes
well,
out,
it's what
that
yoga's
comes out of
based on.
Hatha yoga.
Right.
That's Hatha yoga, which is taught in YMCA's and even in churches across the country. And you even have individuals who go on to say that, well, I'm not practicing Hinduism, I'm practicing Christian yoga, which is bovine excrement. So the reality of it is you need to understand a couple of things. First of all, in Hinduism, at the crux of Hinduism is the belief in reincarnation. And we in the West we love to we have a different take on reincarnation, the idea of reincarnation, because we don't like the Eastern understanding, which is more like a spiral where you can go up and down the spiral in your reincarnation cycle. In the West, we don't like that, and so we do like a circular thing where we're just reincarnated from person to person to person. But in the East, you can be reincarnated into an animal or an insect or whatever, depending upon your karma and what it is that you do in your life. And so what is being said here is you now have a practitioner who is saying, look, you have things that happened in your past life which are affecting your current life. And I'm gonna help you in aligning your force to get rid of that bad energy and to allow good energy to be there. And from a theological standpoint, as believers, we simply reject that because that's not what Scripture teaches in regard to who we are. We are all created individually by the handiwork of God. And there is no Christianity and reincarnation are incompatible, and no way can you fuse the two together.
Yeah, I mean, we're supposed to get our higher experiences, if you want to put them that way. That's how Carl Jung would put it. We're supposed to get our higher experiences from God, and not from ourselves, right? And the whole concept here, like when he's talking about Kundalini, he's talking about like an ancient Hindu idea that basically your energy is coiled up in your spine, so there's a physiological component, and that it needs to be released. So something like yoga, what it aims to do is change your physiology, change the structure of your body in order to better release those energies. And that's what you see happening here, is this ancient Hindu practice that's just been given a modern twist.
Yeah.
Right? It's just been given a modern twist, but he's basically aligning her in certain ways to release the full potential out of her body. And it's not new. And, going back, like I said, to Jung, who was, the late 1800s to the early 1900s, he puts it in terms of psychology even, and had an interest in it. People have been messing with this stuff for a long time.
Yeah.
So it's not new. Yeah, it's just maybe it's new to mainstream in the way that mainstream is. It's more considered fringe, but there's no such thing as fringe when the entirety of the internet is available to you in a moment's notice before it can even become fringe. Everybody has seen it.
Yeah. Yeah, I was reading an article from one of these guys that, supposedly practices Christian somatic therapy, and he was basically trying to challenge the reader, or I guess he was quoting like a conversation he had with a woman about why is it such a big deal? What was one of the main things Jesus did while he was here? He was healing. We're healing. He was trying to it was this weird, obviously bastardization.
Well, and that's the thing, right? People think that because the outcome is similar, that where it comes from is the same, and that's not true.
He was saying, why does it matter as long as their life is turning better or whatever?
Right. Well, yeah, and better is arbitrary, right?
Mm-hmm.
The truth is that Christ only healed on the outside because we needed it. Mm-hmm. It's the forgiveness of sins that causes the ultimate type of healing. One day this body will go away, according to Scripture. Christ says, is it so hard for you to believe that I am who I say I am? Mm-hmm. Okay, since you won't believe it, then I'm going to heal you.
Yeah, but it was a faith issue.
Right, but before that, he said, your sins are forgiven.
Mm-hmm. Right.
That's what really heals people.
Because that's the central issue.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All right, moving on to the last topic. The Kansas City. So, Kansas City won the Super Bowl. Congratulations to them, I guess. I don't care.
I don't know.
But just leading up to it, there was an article about this church in Kansas City, and obviously it was in the news because of Kansas City being the Super Bowl. But about how they hold like a specific set of services to accommodate people that go to football games.
Okay.
Whatever. But and
you mean like they hold them later in the day or something, or
they hold them just before, just after. Yeah, just before and just after, I think is what it said. I forget the name of the church. I can share you a link. But where was I going with this? Basically, what I wanted to ask is is there something that can be gleaned from someone who's putting themselves, I guess, in the heart of a culture that wants to forsake that time, and they're not forsaking it because they still have it, right? It's to accommodate this thing, this football culture. So I guess my question is are they acquiescing more than they should to reach a demographic?
I think here's the question.
Where's the trappings in that, I guess?
So I think it's a bad idea, but the question of morality before God can be asked by asking a simple question, which is, if you didn't have any time on that Sunday because it was football games back to back, would you not go to church?
If you didn't have any time on Sunday, yeah.
Like, that's the question.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that there's any problem sort of living your life and then deciding, as long as you're consistent and, making proper sacrifices. I don't mean blood sacrifices, making proper sacrifices of conscience and so on and so forth, right? As long as you're consistent, I don't think there's any problem with living your life in regard to that. So that means, it's okay to go to a church service at night versus go to a church service in the morning. Like, that's fine. The issue here is, if you can't fit something conveniently in, do you then sacrifice the entirety of it because you couldn't fit something conveniently in?
Right. Do we cancel church because there's a football game
Exactly.
everybody wants to see?
And that's why I say it's dangerous. So do I think it's possible to have a church that is not sinning because when they make sure to make it so people can go to football because they like football? Mm-hmm. No, I don't think that that's so much an issue. But I do think that it leads to a mindset for those who are uninitiated to the thought process of the leadership that says we're going to shift everything around for football.
What, put something before God?
And in that case, you're creating an idol.
Right, and that's where I was going with it. Like,
the game's in the afternoon, right? Starts in the afternoon.
I don't know. I think it depends where the game's being played. Obviously, we have several time zones in our country. So.
Right.
But yeah,
I was going to say, what's the problem?
I don't exactly follow football.
So I think you should. I think turn God into a person and not a machine, and then you have to ask yourself: turn God into a person. In fact, turn him into your most desired relationship. Your most preferred relationship. So let's say with your spouse, right? How do you think your spouse would feel if you had a date with your spouse and then you said, I'm going to watch a football game instead? Your spouse might be like,
that's wrong.
Your spouse, you don't even watch football. Stop goading the audience. Your spouse might be like, that's okay. Like, I understand this football game is important to you. But if you were like, by the way, I'm going to cancel our date, then that would be a problem. And if you continued to do it,
like show to habit,
that would be a problem. And if your children were watching the way that you go about your relationship with your spouse, and then they grew up to think that football game is more important.
Which is what you're saying this could lead to, is like, when you acquiesce to this thing, you're teaching the children that there's something that you should be okay with putting first.
So, in other words, I think it's a very bad idea. Are there certain circumstances where it might make sense to with certain things? Sure. I think relationship, like for the sake of relationship, like let's say somebody having a baby.
Yeah.
I think
as one-off events or something.
Right.
But they're making a practice.
Well, they're building a practice.
Yeah, they're building a practice.
So Lucy Brown says the sport being an idol, putting before God. Sport being an idol, putting before God. So she's on board with that. John Parker says, do we cancel church because the pastor wants to take a vacation? It's about prioritization. I think that's a good point, and I think it's right for you to draw the conclusion that this extends far beyond football.
Mm-hmm.
The implications are wide-reaching.
Were you going to say something?
You look like you want to say something.
I know.
I was just going to say, John Parker, that you wouldn't cancel church, but the pastor doesn't want a vacation. The pastor needs a vacation.
Well, it's just
and the church needs to accommodate time for that.
I think that you have to go through Scripture and justify the concept of need versus want in regard to vacation. The pastor needs a Sabbath. He doesn't need a sabbatical, which has been taken from the concept of Sabbath, and he certainly doesn't need a vacation. Vacation's not a biblical concept.
Sometimes the sabbatical needs to be given. I'm just saying, let's be careful about where we're going with that. Because over my 20-plus years of being in the pastorate, I occasionally took a break And when I did so, it was my responsibility to find somebody to fill the pulpit's needs.
Just because you've done that doesn't mean that it's moral. And just because, or amoral for that matter. So I'm just saying you can't.
Neither or.
Well, I'm just saying you can't justify that it's moral simply because it's something that you've done.
It's neither or. You will find no. But my overall point is, when we look at church administration,
Pastor James pipes in with you and says pulpit supply.
yeah. When we look at church administration, the Scripture gives a wide leeway to how it is the church is administrated. And so I agree with you, Joshua. We'd go back to the idea that, are you making this football game somehow an idol?
Well, and when we look at, so now we're talking about two issues when we talk.
In our earlier conversation, and are you then, because you're doing that, glorifying the violence that is present?
All right, full circle there.
Glorifying the id.
And all the stuff that comes with whatever they put together in halftime?
So it's
stripper poles.
It's two separate. But that is an interesting point. What happens at this game that you have chosen to take in? I have good food. I want to get good food, so I'm going to go to a house of idols to get it.
Or I'm going to go to this tailgating party where I'm potentially going to be, getting drunk, or
right.
Like you're having to tackle a whole bunch of issues when you invite it around this thing, which is indulgent.
Right.
So the question is, did you choose poorly?
Okay. So Lucy Brown says, agreed, James, it is the condition of your heart. And here's what I want to say about that. You have two separate issues now that are being talked about, because on the one hand, everything that was outlined in regard to moving a church service around specifically so that you can participate in a secular activity is involved there. And then we started talking about pastors going on vacation, thanks John Parker, and pulpit supply. And I think the thing you have to realize is that there's no vacation from God. There's no vacation from giving God his day. And so the condition of the heart, even when you give pulpit supply, means that you are coming to God in his body. So that means that you are taking time during that day, even on your vacation, to give God his appropriate time. So while it may be appropriate under certain circumstances for a pastor to go on vacation, it's not appropriate for a pastor to go on vacation from God. And let's be clear about that.
It's easier more than ever today.
Well,
to be able to accomplish that. So to say,
right. So for instance, a pastor to say, I work really hard and I need a vacation, so therefore this Sunday I'm gonna watch the Super Bowl instead of go to church.
Bad form.
Tisk tisk.
That is not okay.
Tisk tisk.
Yeah, bad form.
All right, guys. Well, we're at our mark. So, thank you for everyone that participated today, especially, as I said, our female listeners for giving us input from their perspective so that we're not just a bunch of out of touch and out of place men, as it were, as people might suggest. So we appreciate that, and we appreciate it in the future. If you're interested in any things we were talking about, Josh had been posting them in the comments section as we were going along, so thank you, and feel free to look at those. Feel free to comment when you watch them or whatever. It doesn't just have to be now. So, like and share the video, and I guess we'll see you on the next episode in 2 weeks. So, thanks. Bye.
The views presented in this program are not meant to express the specific views of the S3EP3 Bible Fellowship.